Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is something I've never done on my channel before personally, but I have seen this floating around YouTube kind of as like a trend recently. I've seen Samantha March do a video like this and Andrea Manolano. Those are like the two big ones I've seen do videos like this one. I'm sure there's 1,000 other YouTubers have done videos like this before, but those are the two that I saw first, so I will link their videos down below. I know Andrea does a lot with ColourPop, and Samantha March I've only seen do this like her most recent like eyeshadow palette purchases. And I thought about doing ColourPop for this video, but I was like, I own so many palettes from ColourPop that video would be like 45 minutes long. And I didn't want my first video on my channel like this to be that long. So if you guys want to see a video like this with ColourPop palettes, let me know down below. I will do it. I just gotta make sure I have plenty of time to film that day to do that video because it'll be a long one. So for today I decided to do my Anastasia palettes because I own a pretty, hefty amount of eyeshadow palettes from Anastasia. I have purchased every single Anastasia palette since Modern Renaissance. Besides the collaboration she did with Makeup by Mario, I don't own that one. I kick myself every day for not buying that palette. But it doesn't matter anyways because that palette is no longer available. It was limited edition, so you know what? It didn't make a difference for this video, but I'm really sad I don't have that palette still. So yeah, today I'm going to be ranking my Anastasia palettes from best to worst. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So number one will be no shock to anyone that's been watching me for even a video now. You probably know my love for this palette. Anastasia Soft Glam is my number one most used palette from Anastasia. It's my most favorite palette from Anastasia. Another reason I actually chose Anastasia for this video is because Anastasia is a bit more expensive. $45 for an eyeshadow palette is not cheap by any means. And so if you're looking to buy a palette from her, I feel like it's good to know what palette is gonna be good for you based on the colors you wear, the formula you like, your level of artistry, so that's again a reason why I did this. And I feel like Soft Glam is universally a good palette for basically anyone to start out with. If you wear warm tone neutral browns, which I feel like a good majority of the world's population really does wear colors like this more often. I will insert swatches of every single palette as I talk about it. But yeah, I just feel like a good majority of people wear colors like this. That's why I feel like it's a good palette universally. I personally wear colors like this on a daily basis. I know today I'm wearing a purple smoky eye and you're like, you're lying. But for the most part, I really do reach for my neutral warm tone browns. That's the kind of vibe I like. I like those on my skin tone and my complexion. I feel like universally it's a really good color story for pretty much anybody. And the formula of Anastasia in general is just so perfect. They're so soft and buttery and pigmented. Some of the palettes do have a bit of a different formulation, which I'll talk about when I get to them, but this palette, formula-wise, A+, color story-wise, A+. It is truly my most used and abused palette from Anastasia. As you can probably see by looking at the palette, it's quite dirty and disgusting. It's truthfully just so well loved. Okay, so number two might be kind of a shocker for a lot of you because I don't mention this palette a ton on my channel, but I do use it quite a bit off camera. The Norvina palette by Anastasia. I know a lot of you are thinking I've seen you use that palette maybe once or twice, but off camera I do use this palette quite a bit. I actually used it in conjunction with Soft Glam all the time. And it's so funny to me because I don't even wear purples that much. I am wearing this palette on my eyes today, so I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I really don't wear purples that often. If you've been watching me for a while now, you know purple really isn't my go-to color. Even when it comes to fun colors, I don't really wear purple a ton. But I still bought this palette right when it launched because for one, I collect Anastasia palettes. It's just my thing. I love Anastasia so much and I like collecting her palettes. I feel like they're so unique and just, I don't know, it's a really good collector's item, I feel, so I like collecting Anastasia palettes, so that's another reason I bought this and a lot of other ones I'll talk about. And even though I don't wear purples a ton, there's still a lot of neutral tones in here, but even when I first picked this palette up, I really didn't reach for it a ton because I just couldn't get past the fact that there were so many purples that I would never use, so I really just didn't touch the palette because I'm like, oh, it's a bunch of purples. And then one day, maybe 2 or 3 months back, I was like, you know what, let me play with the palette. And you can do so many different looks in here besides just purples. There's pinks, there's neutrals, they are more warm tone and purpley toned, but I don't know, there's so much you can do with this palette, especially when you do use it in conjunction with other palettes. You can really create just really beautiful looks with it, and that's why I love this palette so much. Yeah, it's just so funny to me because when I first bought the palette, I did not ever touch it, and now I can't get enough of it, and it's my number two. Number three is an oldie but a goodie, Modern Renaissance. I actually don't ever use this palette anymore, but when I first bought this palette, it was the only palette I used for several months. It was my first ever Anastasia palette, and that's why I have it at number three, because even though I don't use it at all anymore, I really just don't touch it, it was still so loved in my collection at one point. I mean, you guys can see, I have used and abused this palette as well, besides the pinky tones, I really didn't touch those, but all the neutral warm tone shadows in here, I used all the time. It was my number one palette. I recommended this palette to everybody, way before I did YouTube, when I was still in high school. I always talked about this palette and how it was so beautiful. People at work would be like, what's on your eyes? What's on your eyes? I'm like, Anastasia Modern Renaissance. It's expensive, but it's so beautiful. If you like your really warm berry tones, this palette is for you. I know it's been on the market forever and most people probably already own it or don't own it for their own reasons, but I still can't get enough of it. Even though I don't ever touch it anymore, I still think it's a beautiful palette, and I really should start playing with it more often because I kind of want to, like, you know, get my use out of it before it expires, because it's probably already expired technically. Yeah, it has a 6-month shelf life. This is definitely expired, but I mean, I did use it not that long ago and the shadows still work, so I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna try to, you know, pan out more of the shades, but Modern Renaissance is definitely an oldie but a goodie. I can still see myself using those tones even though I don't ever touch it. It's still a good palette, you know? Okay, number 4 is the newest palette from Anastasia, the Alyssa Edwards and Anastasia collaboration here. I debated whether or not I even wanted to put this palette in the video because I know it's going to be a limited edition thing, but you can still purchase it as I'm filming this video, so if you're watching this video several months or years from now and it's no longer available, I'm sorry. But this palette is definitely number 4 for me because, like I said with the other ones, you can still do neutral and everyday looks with it with the, you know, browns and dark brown and black in here. But you have the option to do colors, and I like that they're matte, colorful shadows. I feel like anytime Anastasia does color in a palette, it's always shimmery. And while I do like colorful shimmers, I like having colorful mattes too. There's something just so unique and different about having a matte yellow or a matte blue or a matte purple or pink, you know. It's just different than having the shimmer version of those colors. And that's why I really like it. I've been using it a ton recently. I just think Alyssa did a really good job creating this palette. This is just an amazing palette. I do think the colors in here blend beautifully, just like every other Anastasia palette, very soft. All the palettes I have mentioned thus far are pretty similar formulation wise in my opinion. They're all buttery and soft and pigmented and blendable. They're all also pretty powdery, but you just gotta make sure to tap off the excess on your brush and maybe do your eyes first and you're okay. But yeah, this is number 4 just because I really like the colors in here. I like that I can still do neutral looks but still do really colorful, inspirational Instagram makeup. So yeah, and I like that it's not a velvety. It's like plastic, I guess. I don't know. I like that the packaging is different than all the other Anastasia palettes. And it has her little signature on the back. Isn't that so freaking cute? Okay, palette number 5 I find to be pretty similar to the Alyssa Edwards one, except for it being matte colorful shadows. This one has shimmer colorful shadows. The Riviera palette. I do like this palette. I don't reach for it a ton just because I don't find that I can do a ton of everyday neutral looks in here. Like, yeah, there's a brown and like some peaches, but I can't do like my kind of everyday neutral looks. There isn't enough transition shades for an everyday look here on this palette, which is fine because I have other palettes I can get that from. It's just with this one, I don't reach for a ton because it's not a good everyday palette for me personally. There's a lot of shimmers in here and I really don't wear shimmers a ton. Like, I usually wear 1 or 2 with a look, whereas mattes I will use like 4 to 7 honestly in a look. So that's kind of the turn off for me. I prefer to have more mattes and shimmers in a palette. That's just my personal preference, which is why this is at number 5. And not only that, the colors in here I just don't use a ton. I still think it's pretty, and I did a whole review video on this palette if you want to check it out. The only shade I really like struggled with in this palette was the matte purple. It didn't work for me for some reason. It was just really patchy. The color didn't like stay put when I put it down. Like, after I blended it, it was just like a wash of what it once was. I do like a lot of the colors in here, but it's not a palette I reach for a ton, which is why I have it at number 5. If you are somebody that likes your colorful shimmers, I can totally see why you would love this palette because the shimmers are phenomenal and you have pretty good mattes to pair with the shimmers. I'm just not like a huge like shimmer person, and like I don't know, the whole first row was shimmers and I just feel like I never touched that palette because I don't know what I can do with it because it's all shimmers, you know? I also did a review video on number 6, but that video is pretty old on my channel at this point and really cringy probably, so I wouldn't recommend checking it out. I believe this palette is still available, but I do not know. The Sultry palette was the holiday 2018 palette for Anastasia. Every single year Anastasia does come out with a holiday palette, which I love that they do that because, again, I like to collect Anastasia palettes, so I like having like the limited edition, like can't be found after a certain amount of time, even though they still have this on the market, I'm pretty sure. And I still think they have 2017's holiday palette on the market too, so I don't really know when they're gonna get rid of those. I'm not sure. I do like the formula of the Sultry palette. I just don't ever touch it because cool tones really aren't my thing. And I bought that knowing that. I just wanted to have a really good cool tone palette because back when I did buy this palette, I didn't have a ton of cool tones in my collection. I still really don't, but I have a couple more than I did back then. It's nice to have in case I am ever feeling like a cool tone kind of look, but I really just don't like those on my eyes. Even this purple today, I'm kind of like, that's a little too cool tone for me, but I shall move past that. I think if you're really into cool tones, this is a good palette for you because I do think the shadows blended beautifully and you do get a pretty good variety of cool tones in here. I don't understand why this color's in here, Bloom, that really like bright coral shade. I don't understand how that fits in the palette, Anastasia. Like, I don't know why you did that. So besides that color though, like, this is a pretty good cool tone palette. You can do a lot of different looks with it. It's a really pretty palette. I don't wear cool tones and that's why it's so low on my list. But formula wise, I do think it's pretty consistent with Anastasia's other formula. Really pigmented, blendable, a bit powdery, but you can make it work still. Okay, number 7. I feel like number 7 I'm gonna get a lot of shit for. It's just simply not my least favorite. I can't sit here and lie and say like I hate this palette because I really don't hate this palette. I do agree there's a difference in formulation when it comes to this palette versus the other Anastasia palettes. There's a difference at least in the pressing of the shadows or something. I don't exactly remember what went wrong with this palette, but it's different than other Anastasia palettes, and I will admit that. Subculture, listen, I know this is the most universally hated palette in the beauty community. I get that. I don't think this palette is horrible. It's not the worst. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. I do agree you have to know how to do makeup to use this palette. It's not a beginner-friendly palette by any means. It's definitely meant to be a palette for working makeup artists or somebody that has a lot of experience when it comes to blending eyeshadows and using pigments. I feel like these shadows are more like pressed pigments than they are actual eyeshadows, and pressed pigments and pigments in general are just so different to work with. It's so much harder to blend them. It's harder just to like finesse them, really. Like, it's just a really different ball game in comparison to using eyeshadows, and I feel like that's just where a lot of people went wrong with this palette. They didn't know how to use pigments versus eyeshadows. So yeah, I do agree this palette is hard to work with, and that's why I do have a bit lower on my scale, but I love the colors in here. I really like this like 90s retrograde kind of edgy vibe this palette gives. The color story really sells me, and I can make this palette work. It takes a long time. Like, if I'm in a hurry, I cannot use this palette. But you know, if I have time to work with my eyeshadow that day and like I want to do something really cool and grungy and smoky, I will use this palette. It takes a while, and it's a bit trickier to work with, but I can make some pretty cool looks with this palette. I don't hate this palette by any means. It's just, it is different from other palettes. So I would not recommend this palette to a beginner, but if you are skilled in makeup and like you know you're skilled in makeup, you can make it work. And if you love the colors in here, I'd recommend this palette, but it's just, it's tricky. And for the price point, I do think there are plenty of dupes on the market now to where maybe you don't need to try this one at first. I know there are like a couple like indie brands or like makeup dupe brands that have duped this palette out. I would try those first and see if you even like the colors, if you can reach for it a ton before you go out and buy this one, just because the formula is pretty tricky. So yeah, I can't recommend it to everybody, but I don't hate the palette. I don't hate any of these palettes. I actually like all of these palettes. They're just for different reasons, you know? Okay, last palette, number 8, right? 3. Yeah, number 8. This palette's actually quite dusty, and I did use a couple shades in here to create this eye look today. I mainly used the Norvina palette on my eyes, but I did use 2 shades in here. My least used and my least favorite palette from Anastasia is actually the Anastasia Prism palette. This was their holiday 2019 palette. Or not 19, this is 2017 palette. Again, it's not that this palette is a bad palette. I actually do find the formulation to be somewhat similar to some culture, but like not as bad. It's like a good sweet spot in between typical ABH formula and subculture. It's like in the middle where the shadows are like overly pigmented, but you can still make them work. But you can blend these way easier than the subculture ones, but it's a bit trickier in similarity to subculture, if that makes sense. So yeah, the formula isn't my most favorite. It's definitely more trickier to work with. I can make the formula work, but it definitely takes more time and patience than other Anastasia palettes. And not only that, again, the palette is mainly shimmer, and I'm just not a shimmer kind of girl. Like I said, I use like 1 or 2 shimmers per look. That's it. I really don't like go heavy with the shimmers. I just don't. So I really just don't gravitate towards palettes that have a ton of shimmers. It's really just not my thing. And not only that, the color story in this palette is just so funky to me. Like, it's really hard to think of cohesive looks with this palette just because you have just the randomness of colors. You have some like orangey coral colors, and you have like really cool tone greens, and you have like a bright neon and a black and purples, and it's just a lot. It's nice to have a variety in palettes, but like, it's just kind of a lot, and it's like, well, what can I even do with this palette? I feel like they could have definitely set up this palette in a more eye-pleasing way as well to make it more, like, easier to achieve looks with. I don't know. It's just a really funky palette to look at. I don't feel super inspired by this palette because it's just like, I feel like really tense when I look at the palette because I'm like, what can I even do with it? I did use Lure in my crease today. I used the black obsidian in my outer corner to deepen the look up, but I don't know. I really struggle with this palette. It's not my favorite for this reason because I just feel like the color story is really weird. Too many shimmers. It's just not for me. So yeah, guys, that was me ranking every Anastasia palette I own from best to worst. So it's actually kind of hard to do with some of the palettes because I really have to think about like how often do I use it? Was there a problem with the formulation? So yeah, I hope this video is really helpful to anyone looking to buy an Anastasia palette. Now you know like what I think about the formulation and the color story and the type of people I think would like to wear these palettes. I just think Universally Soft Glam is probably the best for pretty much everybody. If you're into different color stories or different kind of looks, then maybe the other palettes are best for you. Like if you like cool tones, Sultry's for you. If you like grungy looks and you're like an expert at makeup, Subculture's for you. more purpley or berry tones, Norvina or Modern Renaissance. You know, there's just something for everybody from Anastasia, and that's why I love the brand so much. I just love Anastasia for a number of reasons, but I love that they have so many different palettes that are just so different. They don't come out the same palette over and over again. They really do make them pretty different in my personal opinion. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching today. Be sure to subscribe down below if you haven't already. Give this video a big thumbs up if you want to see more videos like this. Comment down below if I should use other brands. The only other brands I own a ton from are like ColourPop and Juvia's Place. I own quite a bit from BH and Dose of Colors as well, but yeah, I feel like ColourPop and Juvia's Place are definitely the more extensive in my collection. But yeah guys, hopefully I will see you in my next video.